This episode of the Tony Robbins Podcast is brought to you by Tony Robbins Results Coaching. Are you ready to experience an extraordinary quality of life? Or maybe you're already doing well, but you know you can take your life to a whole new level. To do that, you have to set yourself up to win. You need a process, a way to consistently grow and produce the results that you need. That's what a Tony Robbins Results Coach can do for you. Whatever area in your life you want to change, your relationship, your health, your career, or your business, coaching is one of the most valuable tools you can have. It's an investment in yourself, and it can yield some of the highest returns. Tony Robbins Results Coaches are hand-selected and trained by the master of coaching, Tony Robbins himself, to have the skills that will empower you with supreme focus, powerful insight, and the accountability needed to achieve everything you've ever dreamed. To help you get started, Tony is offering podcast listeners a free results coaching strategy session with one of his top coaches. It's a $200 value, and you're getting it for free. Visit tonyrobbins.com/results. Schedule that free session today. If you have healthy habits, whether that means eating right, working efficiently, exercising, or even taking care of yourself emotionally, you're much more likely to be happy. But how do you adopt healthy habits? How do you step out of the struggle and make them part of your DNA? After all, we're all wired completely differently and respond to inner and outer expectations in our own ways. So what's the solution that will work for you? Hey guys, it's Annie Yoerg, Editorial Director for RRI. In this episode of the Tony Robbins Podcast, I'm sitting down with the best-selling author and happiness expert, Gretchen Rubin. You may have read one of Gretchen's many books, like her New York Times bestsellers, The Four Tendencies, Better Than Before, or The Happiness Project. Her books have sold more than 3 million copies worldwide. You might also have listened to her award-winning podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, where she talks about happiness and forming good habits with her sister, Elizabeth Kraft. Gretchen is the foremost authority when it comes to habits, human nature, and happiness. Today, she's helping us distill complex psychological tendencies into habit-forming strategies that really work. Because developing good habits is the first step to getting happier. It starts with understanding yourself on a level you may have never considered before. Gretchen maintains that people fall under one of 4 behavioral tendencies: the upholder, the obliger, the questioner, or the rebel. It's about how we respond to both inner and outer expectations. Do you embrace the rules, or do you resist? What compels you? What frustrates you? Understanding your tendency toward expectations can help you manage your life in a more insightful, productive way. So you can make better decisions, meet deadlines, engage more effectively, and even find a better way of understanding other people's perspectives, which allows you to find more effective ways of communicating and connecting. So let's go now to Gretchen Rubin. All right, Gretchen Rubin, welcome to the Tony Robbins Podcast. We're so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be talking to you.
So you have this book called The Four Tendencies, and it's an extremely popular sort of identity quiz. I think nearly 1 million people have taken this quiz now.
Now I've passed 1 million. I've had
really?
more than 1 million. Yeah.
That's incredible. So I was wondering if you could sort of give us, a basic outline of what are these 4 tendencies, and what are some of the key traits of them. And then I also want to have people listening today. I've got 2 questions from the quiz for them to answer to themselves, right? And sort of go through the answers of those and help people understand what they are.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Most people can tell what they are just from a quick description. They don't even really need to take the quiz if they hear the description. But if people want to take the quiz, it's at happiercast.com/quiz if you feel like you want to take the quiz. But this is a personality framework that divides people into 4 types: upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. And what it's looking at something very narrow but very significant, which is how do you respond to expectations? So we all face 2 kinds of expectations: outer expectations that come to us from the outside, like a work deadline or a request from a friend. And then inner expectations, the expectations that we place on ourselves, like I want to keep a New Year's resolution. I want to get back into practicing guitar regularly. So depending on how you respond to inner and outer expectations, that's what makes you an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, a rebel. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectation. They meet the work deadline. They keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectation. They'll do it if they think it makes sense. So they make everything an inner expectation. If it meets their standard, they'll meet it. If it fails their standard, they will resist. Yeah. They tend to hate anything arbitrary, inefficient, irrational. They always want to know, why should I?
Yep. I love this one. And by the way, I'm a complete questioner. And I loved the part where it was like, I'll follow rules as long as the rules make sense to me.
Yes. Yep. There you go. That is question in a nutshell. Okay, you get it.
Yeah, I jaywalk, but I pay attention to the cars.
If it doesn't further the value of vehicular safety, then why would I not?
Right.
So then there are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I got my first insight into this when a friend said to me, "I don't understand it. When I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now?" Well, when she had a team and a coach waiting for her, no problem. When it's a work deadline, no problem. But when she was trying to have expectations for herself, she struggled.
Yeah. And you as an upholder could not relate to that.
Yeah, right. I'm an upholder. Yeah. Obliger, but it's interesting. Obliger is the largest tendency. It's the one that the most number of people belong to for both men and women. That's the biggest. And your tendency, questioner, is second largest. The smallest tendency is the rebel tendency, and rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. Typically, they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. Like, they wouldn't say, like, "Oh, I'm going to sign up for a 10 a.m. spin class on Saturdays," because I don't know what I'm going to want to do on Saturday morning. And just the fact that somebody's expecting me to show up at 10 a.m. annoys me. So that's the rebel. And that is the smallest tendency. That's the one the fewest people belong to. It's a conspicuous tendency, but it's a small tendency. And my tendency, the upholder tendency, only slightly larger. Those are the two kind of extreme personality types. They're small. Most people are either obligers or questioners.
Yeah. What are some, famous people, like kind of well-known personalities that you think fit into these four categories?
Well, I think the clearest and most famous upholder now in the world is Hermione Granger.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely textbook. But somebody who you might not think of as being an upholder, I think, is Taylor Swift. Mm-hmm. She seems to effortlessly meet expectations, both outer and inner, without any kind of rebellion or any kind of...
But she plays the card of the rebel.
Sometimes she does. Yeah. But part of the problem, one of the things about the tendencies is you can't look from the outside and know what someone's tendency. You have to know how they think, because the same thing could look... from the outside, it could look the same, but it could be reflecting a different viewpoint. Or you could have a person who's very famous, and so they have a very highly controlled public persona that doesn't really reflect their inner nature. But having read a lot of interviews and a lot about Taylor Swift, I feel pretty confident that she's an upholder.
Yeah.
For questioner, I think, and this took me a huge amount of research because, it was like hard to tell, like, what was he thinking? I think Steve Jobs is a very famous questioner.
Yeah.
I wondered for a long time if he was a rebel, but I think he's actually really a questioner.
Yeah.
Interesting, in fiction, Jane Eyre is a questioner, and literally on the first page of the novel, and I mean paragraph 3, her aunt says, "Jane, I hate questioners." She's literally called a questioner on the first page, which I got such a kick out of that.
Yeah.
Famous obligers. Now, here's one where it's very clear because he wrote this extremely thoughtful, perceptive memoir, is Andre Agassi. If you read his excellent memoir, Open, which is all about, he's one of the most famous tennis players. It's clear he's just like absolutely textbook obliger.
Oh, absolutely. Tony coached him. Did you know that?
Oh, no, I did not know that.
Yeah. He was his life coach for a while.
Well, it's interesting. Obligers work very well with coaches.
Yep.
So
I can imagine.
Because they need that outer accountability. And if you think of a fictional example, if you know the movie, the Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey.
Yes.
The movie's basically about being an obliger.
Completely. Yep.
And then for rebels, Donald Trump is clearly a rebel, and his supporters and his critics alike will often comment on the fact, like, he won't do, if you tell him to do something, he won't do it.
Right.
That's just very clear. Picasso is another famous rebel. So those are some of the famous people. But like I say, you can't always tell because let's say I'm a teacher and I have two students who are refusing to do their homework. One could be a questioner child who's thinking, I'm not going to write this book report. This is a stupid waste of my time. Why would I do that? And the other child's thinking, you're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do, because it's a rebel child. So in the way, and if I was going to try to convince that child why it would make sense to do the homework, I would speak to them in very different ways, depending on what their tendency is.
Yep. Yeah. How do you deal with these different tendencies? Because in the book, you do have, you have whole sections like how to deal with a rebel, how to communicate with an obliger. What are some tips that you have for people who are either have, a child or in a relationship with someone who's a tendency that that is not their tendency, but is something that's wildly different from their own? So rebel, for example, how would you communicate? What would you say to Donald Trump? That's a loaded question. Yeah.
So if you want to communicate effectively with rebels, you always need to remember that the rebel tendency is one that comes from a place of always wanting choice and freedom, and to express their authentic self. So it's, I want to choose, I want to do what I want to be who I am. I want to put that out into the world. So one of the things you can do is you can remind a rebel of their identity. So and some things come hard for rebels. Often they don't like doing kind of repetitive tasks, or they don't like having everything unfold in a very planned way. Like for me as an upholder, the idea that every day would unfold in exactly the same way is tremendously appealing.
Sure, certainty.
That is true of a rebel.
Yeah.
But you could say to a rebel, you want to be a reliable, consistent parent, and so you can show up at a certain time. Or you want to be the kind of president who unites the American people. So what can you do? So that's the person you want to be. So you can do the things that would allow you to express that identity.
Right.
And the other thing that can work that's sort of more concrete is, or if you had somebody who you wanted to motivate at work, or to practice piano, if it was a child, you're a top performer. You're somebody who's a leader. You love to perform. You love to show people what you can do. And it's yes, I am a performer. And what does a performer do? A performer has to do all the things that a person does if they want to be a top performer. That's what I choose. That's what I want. That's who I want to be.
Yep.
But you can also use information consequences choice. This is when you give the rebel the information they need. You tell them the consequences of their action or their inactions, and then you let them choose what to do. So let's say you have a coworker who's refusing to come to a weekly meeting, and it's causing all kinds of bottlenecks and problems. And you keep telling this guy, hey, you got to come to the meeting. And he's just yeah, sure, I'll come, and then never comes. So what you could do is give them information consequences choice. You could say, hey, you know what? We have this 10 a.m. meeting every Wednesday. And you know what we do at the meeting? We divide up the work for the next couple of months. And of course, if you're at the meeting, those are the people that take all the most interesting jobs and the most interesting projects. And then they leave the dregs and the boring stuff for everybody who's not at the meeting. So the meeting's at 10 a.m. on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So you just let the person decide, but you can't save them or insulate them or protect them from the negative consequences of their action. You have to allow negative consequences to fall, and that can be painful. And sometimes that means negative consequences fall on you too, or somebody else who's important to you. And also it's one of the things to remember is do not remind or prompt or nudge the rebel, because every time you say, hey, wouldn't today be a great day to do X, Y, Z? You're going to ignite in them the spirit of resistance.
Yeah.
Even if I was going to go do that right now that you're telling me to do it, no, you're not the boss of me. I'm not going to do it. You can actually, whenever people say to me oh, this rebel had a task and they're refusing to do it, even though I'm giving them all these helpful reminders, I'm your helpful reminders are what's getting in the way here. If you would just back up and be quiet, maybe that rebel would decide to do that task or that habit on their own.
Yeah.
But something you need to follow doctor's orders. Really, I don't, because you're not the boss of me. I don't have to do what you tell me to do.
Yeah. What about questioners? What's the best way to sort of communicate with them? I imagine there's some overlap with the rebels where they need a lot of information, right? So they need to sort of.
Well, rebels don't really need information
because they'll find it themselves.
They need to know what the consequences are for them. But for questioners, it's really what is your justification? So if you're telling me I'm supposed to take 10,000 steps in a day, it's or maybe something the doctor says you need to walk a mile every morning. It's well, why a mile? Why in the morning? Why walking? What about biking? Why can't I lift weight?
Wow, that's exhausting.
It's just you got to explain why. And I mean, maybe you feel this as a questioner, but the worst thing that a questioner can say is that something's arbitrary. They hate anything arbitrary. 5 garments to a dressing room. Why does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense as well. Yeah.
This is mind-blowingly offensive that it's 5. I'm not taking up anybody's time. There's no line. Like, I'm not going to shoplift like Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
So you need to always present the justification. And this is really important, like at school or in a workplace, because questioners, the fact that this is what corporate says, or this is what all sixth graders do, or this is the way we've always done it, this is not persuasive to questioners, and they often then won't cooperate. Whereas if you give them the robust justifications that they need, then they'll get with the program. So you really need to say, let me explain to you why we've decided that we're going to switch to this new software program, because we really think it's the right decision. And I want to make sure you understand why we think so.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I've heard from question after question, and they're like, well, I just don't do it. Like, I just quietly refuse to do whatever they say if I don't understand why. This is a huge issue with medical advice. Mm-hmm. It's like, you're telling me to take this take this at night, but it makes more sense for me to do it in the morning. So like, I'm just going to do it my way.
Yep.
So you need to be very specific. What is your reason? What are your justifications?
Yeah. I liked the example you gave with your husband where you'll text him like, hey, can you pick up some turkey at the store? And if you just send him that, there's a chance that he might just not do it. If you say, however, picks up...
He would definitely not do it.
So then you say, can you pick up some turkey at the store? We have to make extra lunches because our daughter has a field trip, right? Like, just tack on that extra reason, and then you'll get what you need. Yeah.
Well, and one thing, and I don't know if you have this, but many questioners don't like to be questioned, which is very ironic and annoying to others. But and my husband won't answer questions if I just ask him a question. But if I explain why, like if I say, what time are we leaving? He will not tell me. I know it makes him sound like a big jerk. But this is like a questioner thing. They don't like to answer questions. But if I say to him, what time are we leaving? Because I'm wondering if I have enough time to go to the gym. Then he'll tell me, because he's like, oh, I see why she's asking.
Yes. Yeah. No, that resonates perfectly. Yep. So it's interesting because you're an upholder and he's a questioner. And in the book, you also talk about pairings. So ones that go together. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about obligers and sort of the best way to communicate with them. But also, since obligers are such a large part of the population, what are some ways, that we can communicate effectively with obligers? And who also do obligers? Who do they pair best with? Like, what environments are they most successful, and what kinds of people should they be around?
Well, you're exactly right. It's important to understand obligers, because you either are an obliger or you have many obligers in your life, because they are the biggest tendency. They're all around us. And the most important thing to remember for obligers is that for obligers, their frustration comes from the fact that they see that they're meeting outer expectations, but then they're not meeting their expectations for themselves. And this is obviously very frustrating, you know? And so the key thing, and I think of everything in the Four Tendencies book, this is the idea that has made the biggest difference for the most people, is that if you are an obliger and you're struggling to meet inner expectations, which you are, because that's the definition of an obliger, the answer, the solution is so simple, and that is to give yourself outer accountability. To meet an inner expectation, you must create a structure of outer accountability. You want to read more, join a book group. You want to exercise more, go with a friend who's going to be annoyed if you don't show up, or work out with a trainer, or take a class where they take attendance. And like this idea of a coach, when you were talking about Tony Robbins and Andre Agassi, that if you're trying to do something, let's say you're trying to start a side hustle on your own, you might need to work with a coach on that. Or you might have to figure out a way to get a client or a customer or a student even before you're really ready, because you need that accountability coming to you from the outside in order to meet an inner expectation. And so if you're dealing with an obliger, you always want to make sure that they get it. So for instance, let's say you've got an adult child who needs to take the GRE, the graduate school admissions test. You wouldn't say to them, oh, you can just buy a book and study on your own. No, because an obliger needs accountability. They probably need to take a class where they're going to have to show up, and they're going to have assignments every night, and they're going to have that feeling of accountability. That's going to make it a lot easiasier for them. So that is the key thing to remember about obligers.
Is there any danger, though, of some obligers having, not necessarily a lack of self-awareness, but just feeling do they maybe have too much pride to set up an accountability system? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, are there some people that are in denial that are like, well, maybe I need a running buddy, but actually I really don't, and then they just self-sabotage?
Well, see, that's an excellent point. You put your finger on something that many obligers raise. They often seem to feel like it's a sign of weakness
Yes, that's what I mean
Need
is,
that
yeah.
outer accountability, and they will sort of say like, well, I don't want to be an obliger, I want to be an upholder, or I wish
Mm,
I were a questioner because I don't like the idea that I need outer accountability. Why do I need it when other people don't need it? And to me, I'm like, who cares? Like, there's nothing wrong with you. There's tons of people who are exactly like you. This is extremely common in the world that people need outer accountability. It's extremely simple to plug it in. There are literally thousands of ways. And one of my favorite things in the book was seeing all the imaginative, ingenious ways that obligers give themselves outer accountability. Yeah, so obligers sometimes bemoan the fact that they need outer accountability to meet their inner expectations. But to me, I always think, there's nothing wrong with you. There's a lot of people who are exactly like you. This is a very common tendency. It's very easy to figure out how to plug in outer accountability once you realize that that's what you need. So I think instead of wishing that you were different or trying to change kind of your innermost being, just figure out how to solve a particular issue. By giving yourself the outer accountability that you need. To me, there's nothing wrong with needing outer accountability. A lot of people need it.
yeah. So if you are in a relationship where you have a lot of obligers on your team at work, what are some of the best ways to help them succeed or to communicate with them?
Well, one is to create that outer accountability. So you don't want to say things like, "Hey, when you have a little bit of extra time, would you run these numbers for me?" Because that's sort of like too open-ended. That's not helpful for obligers. But one of the most important things for people who are working with obligers or dealing with them in any walk of life is to remember the phenomenon of obliger rebellion. And this is a phenomenon where if an obliger feels exploited or taken advantage of or neglected or ignored or like expectations have just become unbearably heavy, they will snap and they're like, I've been doing this, but all of a sudden now I refuse. And sometimes it's small and symbolic, and sometimes it's huge and destructive. So it could mean getting a divorce, ending a 20-year friendship, walking out on a job and going to the competitor because I'm thinking, I'm sick of you people. I've had it. I'm done with you. There's nothing you can say or do to fix this. I'm walking out. And so what you need to do if you're around obligers is like, first of all, if you are an obliger, watch out for those feelings of deep resentment and burnout that can lead to obliger rebellion. But also if you're managing people, look around and see if things are fair. Like, is it that one person is picking up all the unpleasant work travel and nobody else is really doing much at all? Or is one or two people picking up all the extra shifts and other people aren't really helping out? Or is one person on 7 teams and everybody else is on like 2 or 3 teams? That, like, what's going on there? Is there somebody who hasn't taken a vacation in a really long time? I think all of us need to watch out for obligers, because here's the thing. Obligers feel like they're taken advantage of by others, and they are.
Yeah.
Upholders, questioners, and rebels, we all take advantage of obligers because they're the ones who are the most likely to help us out, which is why they're great. That's why they're the rock of the world. But they do, like, people do take advantage of that. And so I think it behooves all of us to be on the lookout for that and to try to make sure that obliger rebellion doesn't set in.
Yep. I mean, I think one thing that obligers, a lot of them are very proud of the fact that they are deeply considerate of other people and that they really pay attention to what other people think and feel. And for someone who is the opposite of that, it can come across as like almost like a selfish, unselfish thing, right? So the obligers who are very considerate, I could imagine they look at, some of the other tendencies and just think, God, they're so selfish. Like, how could they not understand how I feel? How could they not be considerate of other people's needs? And I could see that sort of boiling up, especially like in a relationship or in like a close connection at work, peers working side by side. I could see how that could be extremely, volatile.
Well, one thing, just to tweak something that you said, this is a common misconception about obligers, is thinking that they do it out of consideration or that they do it because they put others first and themselves last, or that they're doing it because they're people pleasers. No. There are many curmudgeonly obligers who will only do what they're going to get in trouble from for an actual person. What is key is that it's an outer expectation. Now, sometimes obligers are very considerate, and that kind of is the way that it looks, but that's not necessarily true. And so it's really about meeting outer, not inner expectations. Now, and this leads obligers to make an important mistake, because if you're an obliger and you say, I put other people first, and I put myself last, that suggests that if others' demands went away, then I would meet my demands for myself. If I quit my demanding job, then I would meet my bucket list. If I took early retirement, then I would have time for all the things that I want to do that I'm not doing. But that's not what happens. Just getting rid of outer expectations doesn't mean that inner expectations will be met. If there's no structure of outer accountability that goes with it, and that's very important to recognize. And so, and this is the thing about the Four Tendencies. Sometimes people are like, well, rebels are creative, or they're narcissistic, or like all questioners are super smart and intellectual. It's like, no. Like you could line up 50 questioners, and depending on how ambitious they are, how considerate of other people's feelings they are, how intellectual they are, how adventurous they are, how extroverted or introverted they are, they look totally different from each other. But as to how they respond to expectations, they would be the same. So an obliger can be deeply considerate of other people and really, really want to please other people. Or you could get an obliger who really doesn't care what other people think. They just don't want to get into trouble. But they don't really care about other people's feelings or what's convenient for other people. They're only doing the minimum that they have to do. But the question is, what do they respond to? They respond to outer expectations, but they resist inner expectations. That's sort of the only thing that you know from the tendencies.
Got it. Okay, that's much more clear. So, you mentioned that it's easy to make assumptions, right, from the outside that, an obliger is considerate. What about upholders? Because from the outside, upholders, I mean, some of the when I was, reading about it, I was like, ooh, like kind of defensive, very kind of uptight, can seem sort of humorless, demanding. So these are not necessarily positive attributes when seen from the outside, but there's all sorts of positive ones. They're very reliable, very conscientious, very thorough, right? What are some of the truisms really about upholders that you might not see from the outside?
Well, the thing about upholders is that they just are much more connected to both outer and inner expectations. And so this is a very important kind of safeguard for them. Yeah. So upholders are good at sometimes people think, well, upholders would feel the weight of expectations the most, but really they have inner expectations to help them. So it's sort of like, well, you know what, you really want me to stay and work, but I need to go home and exercise because that's really important to me. Or, I feel myself burning out, so I'm going to take 3 hours this weekend and read on the couch because I need to do that for myself. Or, I'm going to take time for my friends. So once a month, I'm going to go to my book club and nothing's going to interfere with that. So they do have this preservative in that way. And the thing about upholders is they just will execute. And so I think in a way, they are the ones that they can cause kind of the least annoyance or difficulty with the people around them. But you're right, they can seem rigid and cold. Rigid because they're like, well, I want to meet my expectations come what may. Yeah. And cold because, sometimes they're like, well, hey, we all have our reports due tomorrow and you would like for me to proofread your report, but I got to work on my own report, so I really don't have time to help you out. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like to an upholder, that's a perfectly legitimate thing to say. Sure. But to other tendencies, it might be like, well, gosh, can't you just take a little bit of your time? And you're exactly right. For an obliger, obligers who are meeting these outer expectations, they really are puzzled by the other tendencies' willingness to, for their own reasons, to ignore outer expectations. Upholders because they're listening to their inner expectation. Questioners because if it doesn't make sense, a questioner feels no obligation to uphold it. And rebels because rebels are doing what they want to do. And obligers are like, well, why does everybody else feel like they can just leave their dirty dishes in the sink at the office? Like, why do they feel like that's acceptable? But to an upholder, to a questioner, to a rebel, there might be very good justification for that. Yep. And I think I love the example you used of the kitchen sink because you're like, there's 4 different signs that'll appeal to each. Like the rebel one, for instance, was like, if you stop leaving your dirty dishes in the sink, like you won't see any more of these signs. Right? Yes. But it's true. Yeah. Every office has that, just like different ways to appeal to, people's sensibilities. Question about the upholder. So it sounds like the best way to nurture and kind of get the most amount of, happiness and success and fulfillment from an upholder is make sure they're in an environment where their inner expectations are in alignment with the outer expectations. Because I could see someone who has certain inner expectations, if they're in a workplace that is not matching up with their idea of what's best, that they would be in constant conflict then. Yeah, but I think that's true of all the tendencies. I mean, and I think that you're putting your finger on something really, really important, which is that no matter what your tendency, it's very important to articulate your inner expectations. Because sometimes the noise of outer expectations for all the tendencies is so loud, it's hard to ignore.
Yeah.
But we always need to be tuned into like, well, what do I really want here? Now, maybe you're going to need outer accountability to get it. Maybe you're going to need a lot of justification to get it. Maybe you're going to really need to tap into your desire for choice and freedom. But for all of us, it's like, well, what is it that you want? And I think we've all been in that frustrating situation where like we don't really know what we want, or we want multiple things and we haven't really thought it through. And then that you can kind of feel yourself stalling out or getting burned out because you don't know what you want. I mean, I went to law school for all the wrong reasons. I did this, I hadn't articulated my inner expectations, and my outer, it was like, what could be more straightforward than I'll study for the LSAT. I'll take the LSAT. I'll go to law school. I'll do well in law school. It was very straightforward. It took me a long time to hear that inner voice.
Yep. What's nice, though, is it sounds like once you heard that inner voice and you chose a new direction, you just went for it, right? You don't stop and think, like doubt and think, is this really best for my family? What about my future? You just do it.
Well, that's when being an upholder is good, is because I didn't need anybody else's support really, or accountability. I mean, I needed their emotional support, but I didn't. Sure. It's not like people are like, well, how did you get yourself to write a proposal on your own? And I'm like, that's not hard for me. Like if I want to sit down and write a proposal, I can do that. That's where being an upholder comes in handy. Yep. But it's interesting. But coming back to the thing about the pairs, because that's a really interesting question.
Sure.
The most obvious and stable pattern, the most striking pattern, is that if you have a rebel who is paired up either in romance or at work, like let's say you have a founding team, almost always that rebel is paired up with an obliger. Not inevitably, but almost always. That is, of all the pairings, that's the one that you see the most often.
That's interesting. Is it a successful pairing? I mean, are both the rebel and the obliger satisfied?
Yeah. No, and there's a deep affinity there between obligers and rebels. But like with all relationships, it really depends on, do both people feel like they're getting a good deal? Yeah. I have to say, as an upholder, sometimes I hear obligers and rebels describe their relationships, and I'm sort of like, that would not work for me. But if it works for somebody else, then who's to say? Yeah.
So it sounds like as an upholder, you wrote a whole book about this called Better Than Before, all about breaking bad habits and creating new healthy habits. And it sounds like as an upholder, that's something that your tendencies, so the best way to go about doing that. What we were talking about earlier with obligers, it sounds like for them, creating healthy habits is really about accountability.
Yes.
What are some of the ways that we, knowing each of who we are in each of these four tendencies, how can we create both, simple habits and complex habits that are going to be good for us?
Well, so in Better Than Before, I described the 21 strategies that you can use to make or break your habits. And there's 21, which is good. It's good that there's a lot, because some work very well for some people and some don't work very well for others. Like you mentioned, accountability. That's crucial for obligers, but it can also often be counterproductive for rebels, like actually hurt. So you need and then some of the strategies are only available to us at certain times of our lives. We can't use them all the time. We can only use them at some times. And some strategies work for people no matter what their tendency. For instance, like super powerful twin strategies of convenience and inconvenience. No matter who you are, if something's easy to do, you're more likely to do it. If something's inconvenient to do, you're less likely to do it. We can all tap into that. Another strategy that works for everybody is the strategy of other people. We're all influenced by the people who are around us. So it's like if you have people around you who have really healthy habits, you're just going to naturally pick those up, no matter what your tendency. Or like something like the strategy of safeguards, which is anticipating challenges and thinking through how you're going to respond. Well, if I go to this holiday party, what am I going to eat? What am I going to drink? How am I not going to stand next to the dessert buffet? All that. But there are strategies that work particularly well depending on tendency. So you named the most important one already, which is that obligers need outer accountability. That is just crucial for them. So that's key. And for questioners, and maybe this resonates with you as a questioner, it's clarity. It's like, why am I doing this? And often when questioners are like, well, I want to eat more healthfully, but I can't stick to this diet. Or, why is it that I don't take this blood pressure medication, even though I know I'm supposed to? I'm like, But do you really think you're supposed to? Are you really convinced? Or do you really trust that doctor's judgment? Do you really believe in the research that you've read? Like, get clear on exactly what you're expecting from yourself and why. And almost always with questioners, when they have that clarity of why am I doing this, then their actions will follow. And if they're not doing it, it's kind of like, I'm not really that convinced. People keep telling me I'm supposed to do it, so I'm sort of saying that I'm going to try, but I don't really believe it. It's like, get clear on that.
That's interesting. That's kind of the foundation of Tony's approach to productivity. It's just get clear on your purpose. So understand what your end goal is, and then the reason, right? So the reason that you're doing something. So if you have a compelling reason, then everything else will follow. So you'll be able to take action wholeheartedly because you are extremely clear, and you also have resolve, right? Because you're so focused on the end goal.
But see, I would say that probably wouldn't work that well for obligers and rebels.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it works for some people. Yep.
It's not that it's not good advice, but it's just like, is it going to actually get them to change or to do something? Yep.
Well, speaking of sort of productivity and to-do lists, because I think this is a big pain point, especially for people kind of starting a new year, and they're thinking about, how can I be more productive? And one of the things that people always talk about is, scheduling. So this is some of the habits that the pillars of habits that you talk about with monitoring and scheduling. Like, these are things that now, with today, right, technology, we have the ability to schedule and monitor pretty much anything we want. Do you think that these are powerful tools for all four of the tendencies, or which ones do you think would respond to these more? And in some cases, where is it actually going to be a little bit more damaging or not helpful? Because I think there is such a thing as like overload, right, of organization. So how do those come into play?
Yeah, well, no, so you're exactly right. Monitoring and scheduling are very, very powerful strategies. But you're also exactly right that they come with a couple caveats depending on the tendencies. So scheduling is something that works very well, except for rebels who tend to hate to be scheduled.
Yeah.
Now, some rebels can do it in their own rebel way, but if you find yourself like, I really want to do it and I keep signing up for something and not going, if you feel that spirit of resistance in you, back off and just say like, hey, this isn't working for me. So like, let's say you want to you want to exercise regularly, and instead of trying to force yourself to go to a specific exercise class, you might do something like, I'm going to join a big gym that has tons of options and I'm going to go every day, but I'm going to do whatever I feel like. Or I'm going to get the schedule for classes all over town, and every day I'm just going to get in my car and see what I'm in the mood. Today I feel like swimming. Today I feel like doing yoga. It's such a gorgeous day outside. And I've got this new music I want to listen to. I'm going to go run outside. I want to feel the sun on my face. I want to listen to music on my earbuds. That's what I feel like doing. That's what I want to do right now. Like, don't schedule it. Do it when you feel like it. Choose what you want. Monitoring is something that tends to work for everyone. And some rebels like to monitor. They find it fun. A lot of people find it fun. Questioners tend to really love monitoring because they love information, and that's information. And then they love to customize. So it's like, well, I see that I go to bed, I get sleep 7.5 hours. If I get in, they like having that kind of monitoring. But here's the thing about upholders, back to your thing about upholders being kind of rigid. Upholders can have this thing tightening, and tightening is when when the rules get tighter and tighter on rebels until they can almost be choking. So like, I have an upholder friend who had a Fitbit and was monitoring his steps, and he said like literally it was midnight and I was jogging in place in the bathroom while my wife was asleep in the next room because I had to get to 10,000 steps for the day. And it's like, at a certain point, like you might think that's a fine and like, okay, embrace it. But you might feel like, okay, I'm experiencing tightening. I want to use my inner expectation and loosen it up a little bit. This is something like, for me, I'm one of these crazy low carb people that you read about. Like, I eat, except for like nuts, and vegetables, I eat almost no carbs.
Yeah, that's not crazy.
And I just keep it. I'm very, very, very strict, and I like that. But for somebody else, they might say like, this is too strict. You need to, like, as an upholder, find a way to loosen it up a little bit.
Yeah. It's interesting. You talk also about how there are people who are moderators and abstainers, and a lot of us think we are moderators. Yeah. And that we can have things in small amounts. And so for diet, this is a great example, right? But when it really comes down to it, a lot of us are abstainers. It's easier to just not have something than to have just a little bit, because then you are just removing it completely from even your thoughts. And that is something I also wanted to, ask you about, is how do we create these habits where we don't have to think about them anymore? Because we only have a certain amount of brain power, right? And one of the foundations of creating healthy habits is to not have to think about them. You don't even need to use your willpower because it doesn't even cross your mind. So how do you get to that point?
Well, that's what the whole Better Than Before book is about, because you're exactly right. The point of habits is that they put behavior on autopilot, so it doesn't take any willpower. It doesn't take any decision-making energy from you. You don't have to spend any time, just like you don't debate with yourself, should I brush my teeth today? I don't know. I've been so good. I think I need a day off. Or I'm going to be so good starting tomorrow. I think I should be able to skip today. Or on a day like today, life's too short to waste time brushing your teeth.
Well, if you're four, that's how you think. Yeah.
Or doing your seatbelt, you just do it. And so that is the goal with habits, is to take something, put it onto autopilot so that you don't exhaust yourself debating whether or not to do something. You just execute. But the fact is, a lot of times people are trying to say, well, this is the right way to form a habit, or there's one best way to form a habit. And the fact is, there is no magic one-size-fits-all solution. It all just depends on what kind of person you are. So I'm an abstainer and an upholder, so certain things are going to work for me. But you're a questioner, and maybe you could be are we a night person and a morning person, a finisher and an opener, a simplicity lover or an abundance lover. All these things come into play into what would work best for you, because there is no sort of simple answer, because there's so much variation within people.
Yep. And that's really, I think, what this comes down to is, Gretchen has an enormous amount of books all about understanding yourself, and then being able to customize your lifestyle in a way that things are easy, right? I think so many of us struggle, right? We're like, we feel like we're banging our head against the wall. We feel like we're doing the same thing over and over again. And that's, right, the definition of insanity. It's like when you do it and expect different results. So I really encourage all of you guys. I loved Better Than Before, the Four Tendencies. These are great. Gretchen also has a plethora of other books, all about understanding who you are and how you can apply that to your daily life to make things easier, live a happier, better lifestyle. So Gretchen,
I also have a podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin. So for people who like to get their information through podcasts, I do it with my sister, who's my co-host, and we talk every week about how to be happier, healthier, more productive, more creative. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yep. So find that on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you guys get your podcasts. So take a listen. And Gretchen, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
It was so much fun to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Same here. All right. The Tony Robbins Podcast is directed and hosted by Tony Robbins. Anna Yoerg is our editorial director and occasional host. Our executive producer is Carrie Song. Jamie Carvajal and Adriel De La Torre are our digital editors. Special thanks to Mary Buckheit and Diane Adcock for their creative review.